Hello, and welcome to World's Finest True Believers. Each episode, a guest and I will discuss one of our favorite comic book arcs or graphic novels from any publisher. My name is Chris. Thanks for joining us. Now let's get started. Well, thank you all listeners for coming back and joining me for another new episode of World's Finest True Believers. We are part of the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network. We have DC Alliance, hosted by Greg and Nathan, covering everything going on in the DC universe in film, TV, and comics. We have Slice of Film and Star Wars Alliance, both hosted by Katie. Slice of Film looks at all the big news coming out of Hollywood and deep diving into a chosen movie with a guest. Star Wars Alliance has Katie guiding listeners through all the news, films, and books and shows going on in a galaxy far, far away. Superhero Discussions, hosted by Travis from Earth One, where he reviews superhero animation on TV and film. And finally, we have Marvel Alliance, hosted by Travis from Earth 2 and myself, looking at everything going on in the Marvel Universe in comics, film, and TV. So if you're enjoying the network, enjoying these shows, if you find the time, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever your podcatcher choice may be. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Finest Believers and me personally at Chris Balga. And you can follow the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network on Twitter at GUA Pod Network. So, as always, introduce everything like that. So, thank you again. And we have a new guest tonight joining us. Brock, care to say hi to everyone?
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Well, Brock, some of you listeners might know your voice if they're a fan of going on in Squadcast Media. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and plug your show?
Sure. My name's Brock. I am a comics enthusiast. I've been a fan of comic books since I was a teenager, early 90s. The main thing that got me into comics is the storyline that we're going to be discussing here tonight. So you guys will get to learn a lot about that tonight. The show that I am currently working on is the Marvel Squadcast show. It's part of Squadcast Media. It is where Brent and I discuss any Marvel news that we come across. We discuss any Marvel books that we are currently reading. That was more prevalent before the Corona drama was happening.
Yep.
And we also take a look at some Marvel animated series and give us our thoughts on some of those. Right now we're going through Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes through there. So it's a series I hadn't seen before, and so it's nice being able to see a little bit of that.
Hey, whatever Marvel we can get these days, right? If it's not on the big screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for joining me. And you kind of hinted towards this, and it'll kind of maybe knock out two birds in one stone. What was the first comic book or graphic novel that hooked you, or if you took a break and got back into the genre?
The first thing that got me into comics, it was actually a 5-pack of the Reign of the Supermen. It had Adventures of Superman 500 and 501, Superman 78, Man of Steel 22, and Action, I think it was 687, if I remember right, or it might have been 678. But it had all 5 of those issues in one pack. I believe I bought it at a Walmart back in 1993, and I was just infatuated with these characters, and I had to read more about them.
Nice. Yeah, that's like getting a big stack of comics. It's always, you never know what's going to hook you out of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell you, those 5, I read those so much, they were coming off the spines, and as I think every comic book fan does when they're a kid, they try their hand at drawing and writing characters as well. And, every single character I drew was either a cyborg or had shades or had some armor or was a kid, something like that.
It was the 90s. What can we say, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, okay, good. Well, so what are we talking about tonight?
Tonight we're talking about the Reign of the Supermen storyline.
Yes, from June to October of 1993. And as we kind of hinted a little bit, talked about a little offline, this is not only a closeout for an outstanding arc, but a story of the time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when did you first read this? Did you it sounded like you might have read this kind of first run or very close to when it was coming out?
Yeah. I wasn't very well versed in the specific time frame that it came out, but it was either late 93 or early 94 when I read these books.
Okay, yeah, I remember. I'm actually looking at. I still have this. The very first comic I bought with my own money. I still have it. I'm looking at it right now. Is Superman number 82, the Return, Back for Good. The nice little foil cover.
Oh yeah.
So that is still in my collection, and no one could. I don't care if it's not worth anything. It's worth something to me. Like I said, I bought it with my own money, what little I had from allowance. So,
oh yeah.
But yeah, let me read a quick synopsis of the kind of storyline in case listeners are unaware of the reign of the Supermen.
Yeah.
Hate to ruin it, listeners, but we're going to start off with spoiler alert, Superman is dead. But now 4 mysterious beings appear, all with powers and abilities of the Man of Steel. One claims he is a clone from the DNA of Superman. Another, half man and half machine, says he is Superman with a cyborg body. Still another, a cold redeemer of justice, states that he alone has the right to wear the S-shield. And finally, an armored figure who says he fights with the heart and soul of Superman. Who is the true Superman? So a definitely, as we'll get into the kind of history behind this, it was kind of the creation and the impetus for figuring out what to do to bring Superman back. Prior to this, we've gone through Superman being killed by Doomsday, and then, the funeral in the world without a Superman. So now we're got to figure out a way to bring him back.
I will say that was a great synopsis of the storyline. One thing that was included with my little 5-pack of comics that I bought was a set of posters that I had on my wall for several years. There were 4 little ones that had each of the Supermen, and then there was a big one that showed all 4 of them on it, and it said, which, if any, is the real Man of Steel. And I loved that line because, I had my favorite at the time, and I remember talking to my brother about it, and my brother, who was actually very smart, was like, oh, well, they say which, if any, that means that it's none of them. I'm like, oh, I wish I had thought about it like that.
Well, now I've got to ask the question: who is your favorite out of the 4?
At the time, the one I wished would be the real Superman was the Eradicator.
All right.
Yeah. Right now, I would say my favorite is Superboy. He definitely has to be my favorite one of the 4 that they had. But yeah, at the time, the Eradicator, I loved him. I loved the suit. I loved the black and blue colors. I loved how the shield connected to the cape. To this day, I still never understand how Superman's cape stays tucked in his shirt. And the Eradicator's outfit solved that problem, but they haven't really done much with that.
And yet they give Tyler Hoechlin so much crap about him having little clips to keep the cape on. It's like, come on, guys, at least it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
I'm trying to think, kind of thinking back, like I have a soft spot for Steel, but I kind of was you back then. Mine was Superboy, just because a young teen being a Superman-like being, that was kind of cool to me. So,
oh yeah.
But this, we're going to get into the kind of the showrunners. This had since it encompasses kind of four series of the Superman, reign of the Superman. There was a number of writers and artists that kind of were the showrunners for this. The one we're going to focus for the main on, and then the rest we're kind of give a little bit of just kind of interesting facts about them from it, is kind of our biggest showrunners, Dan Jurgens, who kind of became, after John Byrne stepped away, he became the next John Byrne to take on Superman, especially how long he did Superman for. Do you know anything favorite writings outside of Superman by Dan Jurgens?
I will be honest, and I will say no. That he has written so much Superman, and that is what I love about him. Even when he came back for Superman Rebirth, or technically the spot right before Rebirth, I I was feeling a little down and out about Superman. If you've ever listened to Brent talk about Action Comics on Fans Without Borders, he mentions, not liking some of the writing in the New 52 for DC. And I was right there with him. We had coined this phrase together where if we liked a comic but didn't love it, we would say it is still better than Action, because Action Comics at the time was really, really bad. And so if I just merely enjoyed an issue but didn't love it, I would be like, well, it was still better than Action. SBTA is how we would just summarize it.
I like that.
But yeah, with the New 52, in the beginning, I was like, all right, this is going to be a great time for Superman. This is a new outfit. Great writing teams. This is awesome. And then I just may not be everyone's cup of tea. It was not mine. And so I fell out of favor with it. And then they brought in Dan Jurgens to take over with what was supposed to be the original post-crisis Superman. And I completely fell in love with it. I loved the dialogue. I loved the writing. I liked the art. I liked the subject of it. And so, if Dan Jurgens does it, I'll read it, especially when it comes to Superman.
No, I definitely agree with that. He pulls double duty as a writer and penciler for most of his career at that point. So very few people can boast that. But he is mainly a DC guy. His first professional work in DC was on War World number 63 in 1982. In 1985, he created the character Booster Gold, who became a member of the Justice League. And, Booster has his own kind of reputation. He helped...
And a revived reputation, too.
Yes, exactly. Jurgens helped writer Louise Simonson and artist John, I'm going to butcher his name a lot tonight, Bogdanove.
I have no idea how to pronounce that either.
I'm so sorry.
I've struggled with it since I was a kid.
I'm going to go with John B.
Yes,
launched the new Superman, the Superman Man of Steel in 91, and he assumed the writing and penciling of the main Superman book with issue number 57 in 1991. And during his run, he created, what became kind of big villains. That would be Doomsday and Cyborg Superman. He wrote and penciled the crossover series 0 Hour, Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey miniseries, both in 1994. In 96, he was the writer and penciler of the new Spider-Man series, The Sensational Spider-Man at Marvel Comics. Interesting enough, this title was conceived to be supposed to be the flagship showcase for the new Ben Reilly Spider-Man. It was initially 7 issues, were written and penciled by him, and he pushed strongly for Peter Parker to come back as the true Spider-Man. But the editor at the time demanded the story be deferred until after the Onslaught storyline, and Jurgens by that stage had become disillusioned and left and resigned from the title, never to return again.
Oh, wow.
After 10 years, though, of working on Superman, he ended his run with Superman Volume 2 at number 150 in 1999 and took a hiatus, but then came back to provide the lead stories in Infinite Crisis Secret Files, 2006 special. He provided art for the weekly series 52, and in Crisis Aftermath, the battle for Bloodhaven. And as you said, he made his triumphant return for the relaunch of, Action Comics for DC Rebirth, and contributed to Action Comics 1000 and became the writer of the Green Lantern series. Just again, Dan Jurgens, like you said, is pretty much synonymous with Superman.
Yep, definitely.
But we had a number of other writers that I'm just going to point out, a few different things that they may be known for outside of being one of the architects behind the death and return of Superman. Louise Simonson, one interesting thing I found out about her is in 1986, Bob Layton, who was the writer of the X-Men spinoff X Factor, was running late on deadline, and Simonson was called to write in fill-in issues of X Factor. The story was never published since Layton ultimately turned in his story on time, but while writing it, Simonson found herself inspired by the characters to the point where she brought a list of ideas to Bob Harris in hopes that Layton might use them in the series. Instead, Layton ended up dropping X Factor shortly after, and at Chris Claremont's suggestion, he chose Simonson as his replacement, and in number 6, her first issue, they introduced the infamous character of Apocalypse. It was then Simonson's suggestion that the X-Men writer Chris Claremont's Mutant Massacre story idea was turned into a crossover through all X-Men books, the first of its kind. Her run on X Factor included relevant installments of Mutant Massacre and the subsequent crossover of Fall of Mutants, Inferno, and Extinction Agenda. So even though she's got some big chops in DC, I'd say there's some pretty big crossovers for Marvel.
Yeah, that's quite a resume right there.
Yeah. But yeah, so began writing in 1991 for DC Comics, started the new title, Superman, the Man of Steel, and was one of the architects of the storyline we're looking at tonight. Next up, Roger Stern. In 1982, he co-created the Marvel's second Captain Marvel and the Hobgoblin, both with artist John Romita Jr. He co-created in 1984 the Avengers spinoff, the West Coast Avengers. He contributed to such storylines as Panic in the Sky for DC Comics, and he also created the Eradicator in Action Comics annual number 2, and was later incorporated in this storyline. Then we move on to our last main writer, Karl Kesel. With his then wife, Barbara Kesel, he co-wrote Hawk and Dove miniseries in 1988, which was drawn by then Rob Liefeld.
Wow.
Kesel, I know, yeah. Well, yeah, I know we say Rob Liefeld, we have lots of images that come to mind.
Definitely. Very positive.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I do appreciate like Rob Liefeld's art in certain avenues.
In certain avenues, yes.
Yep. Kesel and artist Tom Grummett are the creators of the modern day Superboy character Kon-El, which debuted in Reign of the Supermen, and continued on with the Superboy ongoing series. And also, he and artist Stuart Immonen produced the Final Night limited series. And those are our main writers for this. So quite a pedigree of, everyone seems to either dabble a little bit in Marvel, a little bit in DC.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe Roger Stern, I believe he wrote a novelization of Reign of the Supermen, which I read as a teenager for school.
That would ring. I think that no pun intended. I think that would ring true. I do remember. I think I actually did have that novelization. I just can't remember. I can't stick on my mind. So we're going to go that as true right now. So our pencilers, beside Dan Jurgens, we're going to call him John B. In 1991, he began drawing for DC Comics, and Louise Simonson and editor Mike Carlin launched the new Superman title, Superman Man of Steel, and would draw that for nearly 8 years. And he also contributed into the story arc Panic in the Sky. After leaving Superman Man of Steel, he drew 2 intercompany crossovers for DC, Superman and Savage Dragon, Metropolis, and co-published with Image Comics, and Superman / Aliens 2, God War, co-published with Dark Horse Comics. That'd be an interesting fight. I have not read that one.
Yeah.
Then we got Tom Grummett. Grummett drew parts of DC Comics' other major arcs outside of the Death and Return of Superman. He is known also for major contributions into the Batman Nightfall saga, Night Quest, and Night's End. He launched the ongoing series Robin in November of 93 with writer Chuck Dixon, and Superboy series 3 months later with writer Karl Kesel. Jackson Guice, he penciled Teen Titans Spotlight number 7, number 8 before gaining more popularity amongst DC writers with his work on the relaunched post-Crisis on Infinite Earths Flash. This is the third Flash featuring Wally West taking over from Barry Allen. He also illustrated the 4-issue DC / Marvel All Access miniseries, which was the follow-up to the DC versus Marvel versus DC event. And then our final artist, and it seems like we've got so many, 4 titles.
Yes.
M.D. Bright. He again collaborated with Christopher Priest on the final 10 issues of Power Man and Iron Fist, Bright regular artist runs on comic book series include Solo Avengers, Iron Man, G.I. Joe, Green Lantern, Action Comics, when it was published as a weekly series with Action Comics, Milestone Comics, Icon, and Acclaim Comics, Quantum, and Woody. After 20 years in the comics industry, he actually moved on to become a storyboard artist in commercials and live-action television feature films, most notably, or infamously, or for some people who want to groan at this one, in M. Night Shyamalan's The Airbender. So we will not blame him for it's the storyboards. He didn't create it.
Yeah,
he did
we will say that he did that, and we will move on.
So, again, just this is an amazing group of talent.
Yeah,
that could come up with and just build from Death to Funeral for World Without Superman to this. I mean, that's just I have a career. I'm done.
Yeah.
I don't know how you top that.
Yeah. Well, and it really is funny to think about, the fact that there was 4 completely different books that came together and made this humongous storyline, and they were able to get it accomplished on time with relative ease. I mean, can you say that a publisher could do that today?
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes yes, sometimes no. It kind of have to have the kind of working parts and everyone kind of on board. But you're right. I mean, we'll get into that in just a little bit. Before we move on, we're going to head into these ads. As listeners, these help the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network keep the lights on. We don't get to choose what ads come on, and they sometimes can be a bit loud. So I'm going to give you a 3 count to turn the volume down before they come on. 3, 2, 1. We'll be back in a little bit. All right, so let's actually look at, this is one of the reasons I love doing this show, is not just finding out about the artists and writers, but like how a storyline this epic, even though we're looking at the final part of this 3-part, kind of drama of, what this led to, how this got created. Found a great article from Sci-Fi Wire that was published in August 10th of 2018, entitled "An Oral History of the Original Death and Return of Superman 25 Years Later" by Jermaine McLaughlin. So the article is great. It's very, very long because it covers all 3 parts. So we're just going to focus on, obviously, Reign of the Supermen. And it was a conversation with all the different writers and artists. I will call out some of them by name and as they give their parts. And obviously, Brock, I'm going to pause at certain points because some of this stuff is going to be very interesting of what they reveal. Mike Carlin starts it off. They say that, but then came the tricky part, bringing him back, and even trickier, how to keep it a secret. And Mike Carlin says, this is when another idea came up, and we called Paul Levitz and marketing guys to tell us our grand scheme. 4 titles, all published the same day, spotlighting a new Superman who might be the real deal or not. They loved the idea, but the solicitation cycle would be telling people Superman was returning before they actually bought Superman number 75. So everyone decided we would stop publishing Superman comics for 3 months, which was unheard of. That has never stopped since 1938. And so they originally were kind of like, are you kidding me? We can't stop. But they allowed them to stop. And it was this vision of Mike Carlin, John B. goes on, and the courage of DC to actually commit to a ceasing of publication to basically make people believe Superman's gone. He ain't coming back. And Dan Jurgens goes, we planned the entire Death and Funeral for a Friend stories. We had not planned anything in terms of Superman Returns. So that's interesting to hear. Mike Carlin goes on and says, we had an emergency super summit, and we just saw how huge the sale figures were becoming. And we knew we just couldn't have Superman sit up in his coffin in Adventures number 500 and say, I'm back. So we had to come up with something interesting. Mike Carlin goes on to say, in the ramp up to the meeting, all the writers had different ideas of how to do a new kind of Superman. It would if I could only pick their idea and everyone would play along, I really didn't know how to enter into this meeting and pick a winner. At some point, Louise Simonson said on the phone, why don't we just do them all? That was the answer. save the day. And for a little and for a little while, the teams all got to kind of do their own thing after years of forced collaboration, at least for a few months. I mean, that's kind of amazing.
That really is when you think about it.
I mean, just like makes everyone happy. Everyone gets their idea. I mean, kind of like you said, it's hard to believe that something like this would, kind of come together with all these different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Carlin goes on to say, Louise and Jon did their everyman Superman in Steel. Roger Stern and Jackson Guice explored the Kryptonian side of Superman with the Eradicator. Karl and Tom got to do the adventures of Superman when they had the Boy and Superboy. And Dan Jurgens got to do the all-powerful superhero who needed no civilian life in Cyborg. They created the title Reign of the Superman, which was a homage to the short story by Siegel and Schuster. And just a tip of the hat to them at that point. And, it's interesting to say this next part's going to go into why each of the creators kind of chose their Superman. And this is John B. saying, DC didn't really have an Iron Man type character. We thought of the idea of a homemade Iron Man might be interesting. How could a guy with no fortune or Stark Wayne-like resources possibly fill in for Superman? What would motivate him to try? I'd always loved the legend of John Henry, the steel-driving man. I made drawings of him in my teens. I even wrote a poem. I think his story is archetypal to and were meaningful so much to me. And Louise pointed out that he was more than a mere legend, that he was a real historical figure. And, at that point, I really wanted to bring that to life. And Kesel goes on, when I first started inking Legion of Superheroes, within 6 months, I pitched an idea for a new title that I would write for, of course, but I won't go into details about that idea because I still actually might write it someday. Huh. But long ago, I came across this proposal for a main character, which later became a Superman with an attitude, but younger, hence became Superboy. Dan Jurgens, he says, villains are in many ways always more interesting to write. I tend to agree with him sometimes on that. I think they are. I was in drama plays. I always love playing the villain.
That's true.
I just thought it would be great to have a rebuilt cyborg Superman appear into my best, convince everyone that he was a real Superman. The idea that I could bring readers to the point that belief, pull the rug out from underneath their feet and reveal him to be the villain was really fun to write. I'd introduced Hank Henshaw, who became Cyborg Superman, and but this took it to a whole new level. And Roger Stern kind of concludes it saying, I wanted to show readers how frightening a ruthless Superman could be. The Eradicator had always represented the cold Kryptonian side of Superman's heritage, so I wanted to do that with full force. That last story where we saw of Eradicator, it had ended with him being dispersed within the Fortress of Solitude. During the summit, it occurred to me that we could just bring him back as the replacement in Action Comics and do it in such a way that readers wouldn't realize who he was until the ultimate big reveal. So that's some interesting descriptions of what kind of happened and how they got into this.
Yeah, it's nice to hear kind of what was going through their heads on the creation of those.
And they all had their reasons, and it's all their. I mean, obviously, all four of them are very different, but all four of them had their own reasons for what they wanted to see.
Yeah.
It's just interesting scenes. There's some more I'll reveal at the end when they kind of look back on just the whole series as it comes to a conclusion of the show. But we'll look at that a little bit. Mm-hmm. But kind of the background before we kind of get into your favorite parts of the story. Probably a big one. Superman's gone. He's dead. Mm-hmm. He fought Doomsday. He's dead. And that's kind of about it. Like I kind of said earlier, they went on a hiatus for 3 months. The world thought Superman was gone. He wasn't coming back. Mm-hmm. And then we get 4 Supermen suddenly appear. Anything else do you think if someone hasn't read Reign of the Superman that they would need to know?
I don't think so. 'Cause I'm a good example of someone who was just able to have a very cursory knowledge of the character and be able to walk into it and be like, what is going on here?
Yeah. That was a moment that stopped when they press found out that DC was going to kill all Superman. That was like sacrilege. Uh-huh. I think they thought kept him dead. So, but yeah, so this is the kind of the part where I turn the keys of the car to you, Brock. So, we've got 23 issues. We're not going to go issue by issue, but I think we kind of talked about looking at kind of your favorite moments and parts that involve each of the Superman, kind of leading to, spoiler alert, Superman comes back.
Woohoo.
So take us away.
All right. Well, you got to start with Adventures of Superman 500. I loved how it did a good job of kind of encapsulating what we had seen as the aftermath of the death of Superman, and then coming up with these little kind of primers for the next 4 Supermen. I love that they were not afraid of using secondary characters like the Newsboy Legion in Adventures of Superman, the Underworlders in Man of Steel, the whole Cadmus Project. I liked that, you could tell that there was a whole world just full of possibilities that you could mine for story potential here. And so that was the absolute best thing, in my opinion, was just how they got that primed up and ready.
And I like that they, kind of spun it around the story of Pa Kent having a heart attack and, believing that he's helped bring his son back from the afterlife.
Yes.
And that kind of the impetus of like all these Supermen suddenly showing up.
Yeah. I always love that. I love that. In fact, that's one thing that I think has been missing in the comic books when they did the New 52 and Superman's parents were dead again. I really missed the fact that we didn't have Ma and Pa Kent able to talk to him and give him advice and just help him out with things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are a critical part of his life. Like you said, it's nice having them around, but you're right. Not them have. No, excuse me. Them not being there is something that is missed.
Yes, definitely. A couple other big changes. We've got a Lex Luthor with really long hair and a beard. And though you really can't tell in the dialogue, with the exception of the occasional, mate here and there, he's supposed to be Australian.
Yep. I had forgotten about that till I started rereading it. I said, oh yeah, now I remember why.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was especially paying attention to that in the main issues that he was in. I was like, they really don't do a very good job of portraying him as an Australian, but maybe there's a reason for that, because Lex really is not Australian. And as spoiler alert, as we find out after Reign of the Supermen, it was revealed prior to that, but it's the real Lex Luthor in his cloned body, masquerading as his own long lost son.
Surprise! Comics.
Oh yeah, I tell you, anytime I've had to explain that to people, it's been great. Between explaining where Lex was at this point, and also Supergirl.
Matrix
Supergirl. Yeah, there was a big exchange on Twitter between some of us Squadcast guys a while ago, and it was just funny seeing what Matrix Supergirl was like then compared to what anybody else knows of Supergirl now. And that was actually a nice treat in this storyline, was going back and seeing what she did. I mean, she was kind of the pet of Lex Luthor. The two of them were in love. She did his bidding, but I mean, she still maintained the presence of being a hero, because he didn't want the world to know that he was an evil businessman. But she was the Matrix Supergirl. She was a scientific protoplasm from another world that had been brought here, impersonated Lana Lang for a while, and finally took the form of Supergirl and lived with Ma and Pa Kent for a while. and then shacked up with Lex Luthor. But she had the powers of invisibility, flight, a little bit of shape changing, and psychokinetic blasts, which were very random.
Yeah.
But it was really cool seeing those in this storyline. And I had forgotten that she was kind of Superman's secret weapon later in the story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she plays a big part at the end.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so, you got Action Comics 500, you come to the end of it and just see all these like hints of these Superman coming about. And so then we kind of, each of the initial, their own issues kind of follow that particular Superman or wannabe Superman, with some interaction between the both. But yeah, I mean, we can start with your favorite then or favorite now, or, which one you want to start with?
I'll start with my favorite then. Action Comics had the Eradicator. Like I said, I really loved the whole look of him. I loved the inclusion of the Fortress of Solitude. I don't know why I've always loved the mythology of the Fortress of Solitude. In any version of Superman I've seen, I've always loved that. It was really cool that he had kind of like his own bat computer where he had the live monitors that showed, all the news events around the world, and he could respond as he chose to them. I loved his powers. I absolutely loved the energy blast coming out of his hands. I think that was one of the main things that drew me to him as a character was it's like, hey, he's had these energy blasts, and people will stop thinking of Superman as being a Boy Scout now because he can just roast him with his energy blast from his hands.
Yeah, and it's it's an interesting, they all of them have this kind of what represented a part of Clark, or what either was a little bit part of, as we said earlier, Eradicator is like the cold Superman. Just like he don't suffer no fools, and he will take you down permanently at that point. But he can't really. He's not a perfect. The Eradicator had to have those sunglasses because he's not a perfect formation of Superman. And like you said, those energy blasts. I mean, he takes down criminals, just kills them.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I was younger, I really didn't quite grasp the concept of how serious that was. But rereading it now, I mean, he was judge, jury, and executioner all in one, and I can see why a lot of people would have had a problem with him as it was. I did like his little story with Guy Gardner. At the time, I really didn't like Guy Gardner. I hated the bowl cut. I thought his outfit was a little dorky, but I did love the powering he had. But rereading it, I mean, I did like the issue overall. I liked the humor in it, and it was.
I love it how he says, like, if Guy Gardner is going to sign off on this Superman, like he had some kind of quip, or other people had quips. Oh, Gardner's signing off on him. I don't know about that.
Exactly.
I had kind of forgotten about him with the Yellow Ring. I had to go back and do a little quick refresh of how it got to that point. But yeah, no, it was kind of that was probably my probably biggest highlight of the initial couple of Eradicator Superman issues at that point. That's a good one to choose.
Yeah, definitely.
Any more Eradicator stuff? We'll kind of save kind of the Engine City for kind of the as we get to everyone, but any kind of early ones before we hit Engine City, or do you want to move on to a different one?
Oddly enough, it was funny rereading this stuff. His storyline was actually relatively short. I couldn't really think of any standout moments aside from, his fight with Guy Gardner and then his fight with Steel and ultimately the Cyborg happening. I thought it was kind of strange that there really wasn't much to him aside from that. So that's kind of why I consider him not so much my favorite right now. Yeah,
it's kind of a very singly focused character.
Very much, yes.
So which one you want to move on to next?
Let's go to my current favorite, Superboy.
All right, my one from back in the day.
Yes. I First off, I love the art on Adventures of Superman.
Hmm.
Tom Grummett, I I love his art. I can't say enough about it. It just, in my opinion, he was the perfect artist for young heroes in the DC universe.
Hmm.
He just the lines were so clean. I liked the poses, the action, everything. It was great. He was doing Robin about the same time as Superboy, the Tim Drake Robin, the best Robin,
Hmm.
I'm saying. Um, um, I loved it. I loved his outfit. I loved how it was an update on the Superman outfit. I
Gotta have those leg belts too.
I'm
Gotta love that.
so glad you brought that up. Hashtag leg belt. Um, as impractical as they are, you know, I like seeing them. When Young Justice restarted this past year, and
Hmm.
they brought Superboy back, it was so refreshing seeing the leg belts. Um,
Can't say I've seen him come back in a fashion statement in our life, but I'm glad.
it's probably for the best.
It's pure '90s joy.
Yes. Um, but Superboy. So the great thing about Superboy was, I mean, it was good enough of a concept, good enough of a character, good enough of a story that he was able to spawn his own book, which had, I believe, 100 issues. So not a bad run for a character. Um,
No, and kind of how he grew.
yes,
He's kind of the upstart one. I mean, I love the idea that he was all about the fame, the girls, just being one news organization, Superman. That's what they signed off on. But he has such an outstanding arc when it comes down to it. How much he grew to, when we get to Infinite Crisis at that point, it was hard not to really fall in love with his character.
yeah. Um, One interesting thing to note about him is at this point in time, soon after this point in time, we learned that he was not a direct clone of Superman. He was
Mm-hmm.
half Superman, half Paul Westfield, the director of Cadmus.
Yep.
Um, and, me being a fan of him from the start, that's what I took as canon. And then Jeff Johns changed his origin slightly by making Lex Luthor the human half instead of Paul Westfield. From a PR point of view, I get it. It makes sense. It gives him an immediate villain. It gives him some pathos. Is he the villain, or is the villain side of him going to win out, or the
Mm-hmm.
Superman side? So I mean, I get that. Part of me, just the perfectionist, completist part of me, just really still wants it to be Paul Westfield being his
I understand.
father. I don't know why.
It's all right. It's where he started. We have to. It's hard to when someone just says, "All right, we're going to get new canon," but what was wrong with the other one?
Exactly.
What were some of your favorite kind of moments in Superboy's kind of early run before Engine City?
Favorite moments. I loved how cocky the kid was. I just, he never doubted himself for a second. He was cocky, and I liked that. He liked chasing after the girls. He liked getting in the action. And I thought that was great. Oddly enough, what he was doing in these issues, being the poster boy for fame, Insta celebrity, stuff like that, it would really translate well to today with, YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. And if they had to completely redo the story, I think that would be a really simple way to do that version of Superboy.
Oh, he would thrive in this environment.
Yeah. Thankfully, like you say, he has grown though, and so he
Mm-hmm.
he isn't quite like that now. Um, I liked where Action Comics did not really have a clear purpose in their story, in my opinion. I liked how Superboy had the clear story with the love interest with Tana.
Mm-hmm.
him signing on with WGBS and the evil Vincent Edge, and Vincent Edge hiring the Stinger to cause a battle to generate ratings.
Yep.
Rexy and Roxy Leach, who were continued into his own series. They were immediate characters. They immediately became supporting cast for him, and I thought it was really well done. It seemed really fluid to me how they did that.
Yeah, it was. You saw him, like, he actually takes a lot of, Steel is probably a big mentor to him when Steel comes into his arc.
Yes.
And really helps him start seeing that, yeah, I get it. You're young, you're cocky, but you have all this power and you're being so irresponsible with it. Like, you're costing lives because you are so focused on your fame and how good you look.
Yeah. And that was a treat rereading it. I really got to see and understand that part of it this time. It was great seeing Steel interact with him and actually get him thinking about the consequences of his actions. There was that one part where he saved Lois out of a helicopter or something like that, but the pilot of the helicopter ended up getting shot and killed, and Superboy was all like, "Oh yay, I saved Lois, and Steel was just, hey, yeah, sure, you saved her, but a guy still died. I mean, you can't be super happy about this right now."
Mm-hmm. So, no, I mean, that was a good turning point moment for him, I believe, as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Any more favorite moments Superboy early on?
Early on, not so much. I will say I liked the quirk of him insisting on being called Superman.
Yes.
I really like that. Even though, he may have had a perfectly chiseled muscular physique, he was still intended to obviously be a boy. But I really liked how, hey, you got to call me Superman.
Yeah, it's true. Except when you're trying to pull Steel out of, being lit up on fire, like being thrown into a, gas truck, a gasoline truck at that point, it burns them. I like that particular call out.
Yep.
So we got two left, Steel and Cyborg. Which one do you want to go to?
Let's go with the only other actual hero, Steel.
Mm-hmm. All right.
With Steel, I'm ashamed to say I really did not like him originally. I don't know what it was. Actually, I'll say what it was. At the time, I really did not appreciate the art. I did not like how John B. drew things.
You're right. I think initially too, that was the most stark contrast with all the type of artwork at that point. But like you're saying now, I get it, and it fits. Yeah. It totally fits.
Yes,
this whole character at that point. It's just weird.
An appreciation for John B.'s art right now. Reading through those issues, I will say he had the most dynamic artwork of all four titles. That the action sequences, the poses, the facial expressions. I mean, he had the best of any of them, and I greatly appreciated that. The body types, look at White Rabbit versus Lois. I mean, you can obviously tell these are two completely different women, and I really appreciate how he did that. I mean, he was not a cookie cutter, tracing artist by any means. So I love that. And yeah, I really like that book now. And he drew Steel really well. On one hand, I have always thought it was odd that you could see his facial expressions in his mask. Like,
yep,
is he moving that Steel himself? But ultimately, I just chalk that up to comic book magic.
Yep. It's all we can.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I mean,
you got us. I'm sorry.
yeah, they tried to fix it later in Man of Steel, near the end of the run, where they gave him a completely different mask that had like these bug eyes and stuff like that. I enjoyed that run too, by the way. But yeah, I really liked Steel. Going to a backstory as well. You could tell, obviously, that Louise Simonson created a backstory for this guy, and that was evident from the beginning. She knew where she was going with this guy. She knew everything about him, and you can see that in these issues. I really appreciated seeing the supporting characters as well. Seeing the young kid, Keith. I had completely forgotten he was a pretty big part of that title during that run. And I liked that kid. I mean, I was about the same age as him when I first started reading those books. And so it was nice having an entryway character in there, who was not your generic typical sidekick who magically gets superpowers one day and hangs out with the hero. But I liked that kid. I liked, you didn't see it so much in the Steel issues, but in like Adventures 500, you see the Underworlders there. And I always liked the concept of the Underworlders there, and the Warworlders at the end of the series ended up kind of joining in with the Underworlders. And I always liked that too. But yeah, I liked the supporting cast. I liked you could tell that this was a fleshed out world.
Yeah, and I love his backstory. I love it's a man that's trying to make up for his mistake as being an arms developer.
Yes,
and that is his purpose. Like he even says, "Are you trying to be Superman?" I said, "No, I'm not him.
Yeah,
I'm trying to carry on what he represented. He is the one who is the one saying I'm not him.
Yeah,
I'm just carrying on his message and trying to right a wrong." And he became, like I said, he is my favorite character in this entire arc, just because, like you said, it's fully fleshed out. The moments he has with Superboy, being a mentor, trying to write his past. The art, I fully, like we said, appreciate what was done. I mean, it's an outstanding work. But before we get to our last, we're going to take a little break before we get on to Cyborg Superman, just for a quick little ad break. As you know, that these ads help keep the lights on for Geek Ultimate Alliance. We don't always get to choose what ads come on, but they can be a bit loud. So I'm going to give you a 3 count to turn the volume down before they come on. 3, 2, and 1. We'll be back in a little bit. So we got one more with Cyborg Superman, our villain, as it were. And I think it's going to be a good kind of, talk about Cyborg Superman leading into the return and the Engine City last part of it.
Yeah.
It's good, good planning on your part, Brock. I see what you did there.
I swear it wasn't intentional.
All right. Well, talk to us about some of your moments with Cyborg Superman.
Cyborg Superman, first off, with him, you really have to appreciate the work that Dan Jurgens did in creating this character, both in fleshing out his ultimate backstory, and also the fact that Dan was writing this book and drawing that intricate cyborg part detail in every issue that he drew. That was some really detailed stuff in there, and I got to really appreciate him for that. I don't know why, but I've always had, ever since the storyline, I've had this fascination with like cyborg type characters, and so it's just really cool seeing somebody that is part man and part machine. And I liked how deep in Dan's mythology he went to create him. I mean, I knew nothing about Hank Henshaw during this time, and so it was cool that he created him and was able to utilize all of his story work for what at one time was a rip-off Fantastic Four story to be able to create this villain here.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting how he sells it really well. Like
Yes.
for a villain at that point, when he makes the turn, man, I mean, back then it was hard not to say, it's like, maybe he is the real deal.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, in the first couple issues, you know, he mentioned the farm in Kansas. The simple fact that he looked like Superman. They proved that his metal parts were a Kryptonian alloy. I was like, holy crap, maybe this guy is Superman. He did all the right things, but like he even goes as far as to going to the White House and saving a terrorist plot and leaving a communication device with the President Clinton, by the way, which was interesting to see. It was really cool at the time, thinking, okay, yeah, this guy's the real deal because of what he's doing here. It is funny in retrospect, looking back and seeing, okay, yeah, this was all a plot from the beginning to earn the trust of these people here.
Yeah, I think my favorite issue of the initial of his beginning part was the Prove It issue, with the reporter Ron Trope,
yes,
trying to prove himself to take over for Clark.
Yes,
at that point, I think that was my favorite issue. Not just the writing, but just so cool to see this outsider looking in, and it not being dictated by, Cyborg Superman. It's just what he sees, what Trope sees.
Yeah, I agree. It was nice getting the everyman perspective there, while still actually showing the hero's exploits.
Mm-hmm. And but yeah, it was. He had me convinced initially. But then we come to his truth.
Yes. I will never forget the issue when he first turned on Superboy.
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten a couple neighbor kids, friends of mine, into comics, and one of them purchased this particular issue. I hadn't been able to get it yet, but this neighbor of mine did, and we read it, and it was just complete and total shock. Once Cyborg Superman turned on Superboy, it's funny. My neighbor pointed out that he thought it was kind of funny how, like, Cyborg came across a couple of survivors from the first initial blast. And he goes, "Oh, hey, look behind you." And then he just turns his hand into a gun and just completely obliterates them. My neighbor thought that was hilarious, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so bad."
Yeah, it's one of those, like, oh, you're laughing not because you find it funny. It's just like, oh my god, that just happened.
Yeah.
Like you said, like taking down Superboy. Even before that, like his not taking down Eradicator and putting the blame on the destruction of Coast City on Eradicator. That was, and finding out Mongol is one of the reasons, for Cyborg Superman. It's just, oh my gosh.
Yeah. That was huge. And it was strange, though, at the time, I didn't know anything about Mongol, but looking back, that was a huge thing.
Mm-hmm. And that Mongol is not the one in charge, even though he thinks he wants to be. Hank Henshaw, Cyborg Superman is the one doing this. And, just the outright destruction of Coast City, and how Cyborg Superman was able to keep the world convinced that he was still the good guy. That was just amazing.
Yes.
But going on in the background at this time, something's going on in the Fortress of Solitude.
Yes, and I remember when I first read this as a teenager, I didn't get all the issues in the right sequence, and so I didn't see all this happening. And so, like, once he came back at the time, I was kind of confused by it, and it was weird reading it this time they never, specifically explained. Oh yeah, by the way, Superman's body has been in this regeneration matrix for a while.
And Eradicator's been feeding off of it.
Eradicator has been vampirically just feeding off his energy.
Yep.
So that was definitely strange seeing that, and
it was just interesting, just saying like he has basically been in a coma.
Yeah, essentially.
And he just Doomsday killed him, but to it's almost like that Princess Bride. Well, you only lost most of your life. You got a little bit left. You're not really dead. You're just kind of dead.
Yeah. It was interesting seeing the Eradicator's explanation for it. He was like, well, just under these circumstances, you just happen to, be able to come back to life.
And I liked it that, he just didn't come back, like he was ready to go. Like there was reasons, like he had to be in the Kryptonian suit. I like that moment where we see Lois see him for the first time and just just doesn't know what to believe.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that was great.
And that, he doesn't have enough soup, soaked in the sun. So he's got to, have flight boots or have a little help from Supergirl. But and then we get our infamous black suit Superman.
Yeah.
Come on.
Good suit.
It is. And maybe we'll see it someday soon. Snyder Cut.
It is funny though how that suit has kind of perpetuated through Superman's history since the early 90s. Like we saw it very briefly in Superman Returns. We saw it in was it Elseworlds that we saw it in? Yes, Elseworlds on the DCCW. I want to say we saw it in one other thing. I guess the Emperor Joker storyline, we saw it briefly there.
And I want to say, we might have actually, in some of the screen tests of maybe Nick Cage when his whole Superman stuff, I think they did a little homage to that as well.
Let's just not mention Nick Cage if at all possible. Oh.
I mean, you're right. It's just it's a image in a suit that is, interestingly enough, kept on coming back, and even in Rebirth, as I
had forgotten about that. He had
right before. So, but yeah, I mean, he comes back and they all meet up in Engine City formerly Coast City, and take down cyborg Superman. I'd say they did a really good job at a battle. The battle being portrayed like that. I didn't know if they were going to make it initially. Now I do, but
yeah. It is interesting seeing. At the time, it felt like they just quickly got to Engine City, but rereading it, they actually took several issues to develop them getting on their way there. So I did like seeing, the explanation or I liked the cooperation between Steel and the true Superman, and I liked the reveal of Supergirl there. So that was cool to see.
Yeah, and how Superman gets back his powers, with Eradicator getting in front of him and his energy giving back the powers of Superman, and just he gets to destroy Hey Kensho, even though he knows he's going to come back. He doesn't care. He's like, I'm taking you down.
Yeah. And I got to say, Dan's art was stellar in that last issue. I will always remember Superman breaking off Cyborg's jaw and then Cyborg holding that tube that shoots kryptonite out of it. Like, I love that image. It's so detailed in my mind. I love it. And I love seeing him just shooting that out. It's so good.
No, it is. And this was pretty much a year-long arc. In 1 year, we have seen the death, World Without, and a return to Superman. The heck of a year someone's had.
That is a heck of a year.
I don't think you can top that one, but it's a great conclusion to on any list of what you should read as a comic book fan. the Death and Return of Superman is definitely it's got to be in everyone's top 10 somewhere in there. It's got to be.
Yeah. It's compelling. It had great art. It had a lot of good detailed backstory to it. So I love it.
And these characters a lot of them just continue on, which is even more amazing at that point.
Yeah. I mean, they were able to continue with all these supporting characters through the rest of their long storylines. Superboy and Steel got their own series. Superboy lasted 100 issues. Steel didn't last quite that long, but he did have a nice run.
And he had an ongoing presence even after his own run in the Justice League. He
Yes.
was always there. He was always treated with so respectful.
Yes.
Everyone, it was never made as a joke character. He had a purpose, had a reason.
Yeah, that was the nice thing about Grant Morrison bringing him into Justice League is he really showed just how intelligent John Henry was and showed that he could hold his own with Batman and Superman and be a productive member of the team.
Mm-hmm. And, Cyborg Superman would always kind of come back.
Well, and yeah, say what you will about Cyborg. He got reinvented out in space and came back when Superman had some more adventures out there. And then he came back again as part of the Sinestro Corps war. And that was a huge surprise, and that was really cool. I really enjoyed that.
He's kind of become more of a Green Lantern enemy since his introduction to Sinestro Corps.
He did for a while there, yeah, he did.
And I kind of like that kind of reintroduction of him. So he had some mainstays of the heroes that came out of this, even the villains. John B. kind of talked about how much he loves his character still. He said, he said, I love this. I love John Henry Irons. The character feels like a real person to me, like family almost. He says, I'm actually honored Shaq liked the character so much because he wanted to make a movie. It certainly has craptastic charm in the comic. It's direct quote, craptastic charm. Steel has generally fared much better in the comics than the movie, and several writers have written him, but and I think they've been pretty good, and I've been particularly pleased with particularly the runs of Christopher Priest and Dennis Conway's run on the character. And so it's just nice seeing what has come about. The impact of this has continued on. And I found this one little part continuing with the impact of this is the infamous super mullet. On Twitter very recently, someone asked Dan Jurgens about the mullet. He is very much saying, no, it is not a mullet. It is long hair. I will take that to my grave. It is not a mullet.
We've mentioned over the past hour how much we love Dan Jurgens, but I got to disagree with the guy here. It was obviously a mullet. The way some of the artists drew it, I mean, it was pure party in the front, or business in the front, party in the back.
Yeah. Especially when he came back as Clark and then he got the ponytail going on. I was like, oh man, you are pure 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just, it is an amazing story. One of the questions I ask, and it's kind of a moot point, is, I asked, like, can you see this as a movie or a TV show? Well, it was an animated movie. I mean, we got the Death and Reign of the Superman, and I really, but when this airs, I'll be done with my rewatch of the DCAU marching towards, Justice League Dark Apocalypse. But I like what they did differently with Death and Return of Superman, with the Doomsday and the Reign of Superman. I thought it was really cool bringing in 3, 2, 1, spoiler alert. It's part of Darkseid. It was just kind of cool what they did with it. I mean, we may, with the Snyder Cut and things like that, I don't know. We've seen I don't think we're going to get ever a full-on Reign of Superman outside of the animated show, but it was kind of cool getting to see it.
Yeah, the purist in me was slightly disappointed that it wasn't, an off the comic page translation. But I completely understand why they went the route that they did. Can you imagine having to explain Hank Henshaw and Paul Westfield and Dabney Donovan. I mean, can you imagine having to explain all of them in a brief movie? That would have been nearly impossible. But yeah, I like what they did with Darkseid. And heck, even with the people with powers, it was a clear, coherent story, and it still got the spirit of Reign of the Supermen across.
Yeah, no, it was the more we watched it, the more I actually like it a lot more than originally when I thought. I was like, oh, it was okay, but now it's definitely on my top list for DCAU. But as we kind of get ready to conclude the show, want to ask, what makes Reign of the Supermen one of your? Why do you keep coming back to it? Why this story?
Ultimately, the reason why I keep coming back, I mean, my personal reason is this was my introduction to comics. And so no matter what, it will always hold a special place in my heart for being that entryway into this hobby that I have enjoyed for almost 30 years now. That's the biggest reason why I will tout it. But also the fact that you've got one storyline, but you've got 4 or technically 5 compelling focal figures. I would call them protagonists, but Cyborg is an antagonist ultimately. You can't always point a person towards a storyline like that. And so that's why I like it. Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes complete sense. Like you said, it what got you into this lovely hobby we all seem to enjoy. So my final 2 questions are, who would this kind of appeal to? Who would this arc appeal to? And what is your elevator pitch to someone who has never read this?
Oh gosh. Who would this appeal to? I would say that this would appeal to someone who I'll mention it from my point of view. It would appeal to someone who had a passing knowledge of Superman and was willing to invest some time into reading more about him. The biggest thing that I liked, or the biggest thing that I appreciated about this storyline was not only can you, for the most part, read it as a complete storyline, but you can also go back and read The Death of Superman and The Funeral for a Friend to get more of that immediate storyline. But you can also go deep further back and read about Hank Henshaw, read about Mongol and Warworld, and also continue going forward with the new characters like Steel, like Superboy, like Cyborg. So that would be a good audience to pitch it to to recommend it to is people that are already kind of invested in comics. As for an elevator pitch, I would probably pitch it to people like nowadays it's nothing to binge a TV series on Netflix. That's a pretty common thing for people to do. And so a way for me to do an elevator pitch is to do it just like that. Hey, you've got 4 seasons of a TV show right here that you can watch, all in one sitting, and it'll take you some time to do it. It's a lot of content to get through, and it's good content. And so I think that's the way I would pitch it, is kind of like binging a Netflix series.
I like it. That's a very unique and interesting way of thinking. I like it. That's good. Well, first, any final thoughts before we say our goodbyes?
I don't think so.
You said it all.
Yeah, I think I said it all.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much, Brock, for coming on. I'm a big fan of everything Squadcast. I love your new show with Brock. I mean, not Brock, Brent.
Yeah.
Love your new show with Brent.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it. And I look forward to having you back on. Hope you will come back on again soon. And I was, like I said, you're a Marvel show, but I was kind of surprised when you chose DC. I know you like both, but I was saying he's going to choose from Marvel. I like the curve. Maybe next time a Marvel one, but why don't you tell people how they can follow you and plug your show?
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @BrockWasRight. And you can also listen to me on Marvel Squadcast. That is a show that I do with Brent where we talk about all things Marvel, pretty much, both comics, movies, TV shows, everything like that. And yeah, I guess I feel like I should kind of explain a little bit more why I didn't choose a Marvel storyline.
Oh no, you don't need to.
Ultimately it was the first storyline that got me in comics, and that's why I went for it.
No, it's I love it. It's personal to you. That's why this, I like those personal touches. That's what makes I think what makes the show great.
Yeah, definitely.
So no, it was great having you. As I said, hopefully you come back on again. Look forward to our next conversation. And thank you, listeners. We've come to an end of another episode of World's Finest True Believers. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @FinestBelievers and me personally @Chris Balga. You can follow the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network on Twitter @GUA Network. You can email the show at worldsfinesttruebelievers@gmail.com. Feel free to tweet or email if you want to be a guest in the show. I'm always loving our new guests that are coming on. Tweet at me, email me, say, hey, you want a guest? I got a story I want to go on. We'll get you on. Trust me, I love it. Provide feedback, ask questions. Again, review and rate the network on any of your podcatchers of choice. And as always, listeners, thank you for taking the time. You all are truly world's finest true believers. And whenever you're listening to this, morning, afternoon, evening, or the deepest of night, I truly appreciate it. Thank you, Brock. Thank you, listeners. Have a good one. Bye-bye.